There is an old Yiddish saying, Die Liebe is süß, mit Brot is sie besser. Love is sweet, but it's nice to have bread with it. How true that is. We read in this week's Parsha, earlier than where we began, that our ancestors were subject to the hardship of hunger. And then the Holy One gave manna to eat, which neither you, says Moses to the people, nor your fathers had ever known, in order to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but that man may live on anything that the Holy One decrees. It's a familiar verse. Dr. Lieber teaches, of course, that it's usually taken to mean that people need more than bread to survive, including culture, art, and food for the spirit. But in context, it is better understood to mean that people can survive actually on less than bread, namely that manna from heaven with which God had sustained them. A powerful lesson about hunger and from where we get our nourishment. Just a few verses later in Deuteronomy chapter 8 as well, we hear God is bringing us to a good land, a land with streams and springs and fountains issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat, barley, vines, figs, pomegranates, olive trees, and honey, a land where our ancestors would eat food without stint, where they would lack nothing, and a land whose rocks were iron and from whose hills they could mine copper. And then this verse, the seed of our grace after meals, ve'achalta ve'savata uve'rachta et Adonai Elohecha al ha'aretz hatova asher natan lach. When you have eaten your fill, you must give thanks to the Holy One your God for the good land which God has given you. Do not forget. Every week after our beautiful lunches here, when we say ve'achalta ve'savata uve'rachta at our benching table, I'm amazed again at the power of the liturgists who looked to this little phrase and acknowledged that one who has eaten and had their needs met and feels satisfied before getting up from the table should at least take a long moment of gratitude for the food that has been provided, that is healthy and sustaining. We are so unbelievably fortunate. Most of us, please God, have known very few days, if ever, in our lives where we weren't sure from where our next meal was coming. And this institution of the benching after meals is such a powerful reminder that it is not just a way of quickly sustaining our bodies that we sit down to eat, but an actual, if we make it so, spiritual portal. I remember clearly as a child at the Hebrew Academy thinking that what we did after lunch was called benching because most of the time we had lunch sitting on long benches. And of course the reminder, and as the customs and halakha of benching developed, you are supposed to do your benching sitting down. So it made perfect sense to me that we would stay on our benches to bench. Only discovering many, many years later, and with all due respect to our wonderful teachers, I never knew what the benching, the after meals blessing meant until I had to teach it in a Reform religious school. And going through the blessing with these beautiful educational materials from Torah Ora Publishing, I said, my goodness, what a beautiful set of prayers this is indeed. This benching, we get the word from the Yiddish term benchen, which has come to mean bless, but we think that it actually has its roots prior to the Yiddish we would be familiar with, in medieval French. Rashi had written out what was done after meals with the letters Bet, Nun, Shin, I think, and Nun, final Nun. I don't have it actually written out in the Hebrew letters, so forgive me, but it was read Bénisson, which was probably medieval French for blessing. Over time, those same letters got misread and were read as Benshon. So it probably does come from French, and from it we have the beautiful term to bench licht, which is to bless light, and of course to bench after meals. This blessing, which comes directly from this week's Parsha, is mandated for use following any meal in which bread has been eaten. According to Jewish law, eating bread does officially constitute a meal. It should be said sitting at the same table where you have had your meal, or at least in view of the same table where the meal was eaten. You may wonder, you probably haven't, why I often save a little bit of food to make sure that I have that, even if it's just a little bit of dessert, at the table where we ultimately bench afterwards. Sometimes I don't sit until that point. That's totally fine. Of course, as another one of my Hebrew Academy teachers told us, if you stand up and eat, you get fat feet. So additional wisdom from those early Hebrew Academy days, because there was a little fellow who never sat down for anything, especially including lunch, darling Stephen. So from there, we all learned that. Amazing what sticks in our heads from being 6 years old. Thank you, Mrs. Friedman, for that amazing wisdom. But reciting the blessing after the meals is a mitzvah. Coming from this Torah portion, we continue to add restrictions, encouragements. Over time, some of the obligations include that you should have at least a kezayit, a word many of you are familiar with, the volume of an olive. A zayit is an olive. At least that amount of bread that can also satisfy hunger. It's not just supposed to be a bite that leaves you still wanting. There are a number of people have coined a modern word, benchophobia, concerned that if they eat too much bread, they may have to then say this extended blessing, and if they're not comfortable with saying it, they will maybe try to eat a little bit less so that they're not obligated to bench. The rabbis over time discussed, they didn't really discuss pizza exactly, but into the modern world, what exactly is considered a meal in order to need to fulfill the mitzvah of doing your benching. So for instance, if you have one piece of pizza, depending on its size, that's considered a snack. 2 pieces constitutes a meal, and your benching needs to be said. The requirement to bench is applied also to women, though there is a scholarly debate on whether that obligation comes from our Tanakh or if it is a more rabbinic addition. Again, it should ideally be recited in the same location where you ate, though most authorities permit reciting it elsewhere. I love this rule. If you unintentionally leave, I'm not sure what that means, if you have left unintentionally, but apparently if you find yourself somewhere else, maybe if you forgot to do your benching and you remembered, I should have said my benching, you can do it elsewhere. Better to say it than not. It should be spoken aloud or sung aloud enough to hear yourself, though I love this. Customs regarding volume vary. So how loud it should actually be is up for discussion. When 3 or more men, traditionally, or in more liberal settings, 3 or more adults of bar bat mitzvah age have eaten together, it includes a zimun, we call it, an invitation to bless. That's how we begin. Chaverai nevarech. Please, friends, come and let us bless. And it allows for fulfillment by listening attentively to someone else recite it if you're unable to recite it yourself. Generally, the rule is if one doesn't feel up to it or is too tired. So if today people are a little too fatigued for benching, that is okay. Moshe and I will carry you. But the depth of Birkat HaMazon extends beyond a simple thank you. Traditionally, it is said that each of the 4 blessings has a distinct origin, that Moses wrote the first blessing after the manna was received, that Joshua wrote the second paragraph upon entering Israel, that King David and Solomon together wrote the 3rd paragraph for Jerusalem, and the sages, many, many centuries later, at Yavne, wrote the 4th paragraph following historical upheaval. We don't actually know who wrote these blessings. The wording of the blessings is hinted at in the Talmud, not explicitly stated. The Talmud only mentions the blessing by their titles and final lines. So there have been a lot of potential versions. The one we do here is not the only one. And those brief Talmudic versions have in recent times served as precedent for shortened texts of the Birkat Hamazon. It really is very long. The premise I always think of is, it's Shabbos, you've had lunch, where are you going? Don't run away. We want to linger a little bit longer. It is really long, and it feels that way, especially when you're young. A few months ago when my brother was here, he's over 50 now, which is amazing to me, and at the end of the Birkat Hamazon, he turned to me and said, that used to seem a lot longer. And it was exactly as long as we used to do. I said, I know, honey, I know the feeling. After the fourth blessing, there are a series of short liturgical statements that all begin with the word harachaman, may the compassionate one. And each of those asks for a particular gift from the Holy One. You notice maybe in different versions of our Birkonim, the books where our Zmirot and our benching is found, that you can tell how the blessings and the harachamans have evolved over time. I find them especially powerful right now as we offer our harachamans for this country where we live. I've taken to saying 2 amens. For beautiful Israel, I say now 3 amens. For those who need to be taken from darkness to light, I'm adding 4 amens for our beloved, innocent, not forgotten hostages. And the last one, if all else fails, for the Messiah to come. This one we say especially loudly because when all else feels like it is failing, we pray at least for the Moshiach to come. There is so much deep and terrible soul searching that is going on right now, so much pain over who in our moment in history has enough to eat, who doesn't, and who is to blame. While the fingers are pointing, people are dying of hunger and starvation. Most prominently and publicly, dying of starvation of the body, but also of the mind and spirit and heart. And no matter who we think is to blame, we can likely agree, I hope, that there is simply not enough sustaining going on in this world. For those of us who today have enough food, maybe even so much that we can say, I'm full and can't even finish, let us turn to the words of our Torah portion. If we are so incredibly fortunate as to have enough food to eat, that we can be satisfied and linger in relative safety at our tables to give a blessing, may us please do this together and remember those who do not have, and do what we can to sustain and nourish all of those who need. Shabbat Shalom.